Hey everyone, welcome to Eating Enlightenment. I'm here with Beth Rosen. Hey Beth,
Hey,
how's it going? You're in Connecticut?
I am. I'm glad to be talking to you today.
I'm excited as well. So, just to introduce Beth, Beth is a non-diet registered dietitian and the owner of Good Gracious Living Nutrition. Beth has a bachelor's degree in dietetics from the University of Maryland, a master's degree in nutrition education from Columbia University, and has been working in the field for over 20 years. In Southbury, Connecticut, she has a private practice and she focuses not only on food, but also food related things such as digestive disorders like irritable bowel disease, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We're going to get into some of these intestinal topics later on. But also, Beth has designed techniques and programs to empower chronic dieters, disordered eaters, and those in eating disorder recovery to really help with food and the relationship food, your body. And then something that I'm also really excited to talk with Beth about. She's has a great media presence. It's fantastic, from Huffington Post, Fabulous Magazine, Fox 61 Morning Show. You can find all of that and more at goodnessgraciousliving.com. That's a lot. That's
Yeah, it
awesome.
was. Thanks for that introduction.
Yeah, I want to jump into your journey. Very, very long time ago, you wrote you had been doing it, binge eating, emotional eating, since you were 9 years old and never found the solution to your weight problem, quote unquote, from any of the diets you tried. And you tried them all. Take me back.
Yeah, so I don't know that I would say that I binge ate or emotionally ate, but I definitely dieted. I was looking to be smaller, as most women are taught to do. So my first diet was when I was 9, and it was the hot dog diet. And I don't know if you've heard of this, but I'm not going to give the major details because I don't think anyone should go on it, but it was a 3-day diet. It involved hot dogs. And I tried it. And I lost weight. And of course, as with 95% of people who diet, the weight came back. But that was the beginning of my journey of trying to change my body and really living with the idea that there was something wrong with my body.
Yeah. And you said you tried all the diets. When you tried one and stopped, regain the weight, what did you think? What made you try yet another diet?
So I wasn't at a place yet where I realized that I wasn't the failure, that it was the diets that are failures. I know that now with research that's been done that weight loss really should be called weight cycling because only about 3% of people are able to keep the weight off after 3 to 5 years of going off the diet. And what the diet industry doesn't tell us is that when you do go off of it, you're going to gain the weight back. It's just the nature of our chemistry. It will just draw us back to where our body's supposed to be. So I tried them all. Sometimes they were more sustainable than others as far as how long I could stay on them. But in the end, it was always restrictive. It always made me feel badly about myself. It caused a lot of anxiety about if I did get to that quote unquote goal number, how would I get to stay there? And that part was scary. And then, of course, I put diets on diets because as you get to a certain part of a diet, your body, which the diet industry might call a plateau, I would say that's when that cascade of hormones kicks in to try to get your body back to homeostasis and slows down your metabolism enough to stop the starvation because your body doesn't know the difference between starving yourself on purpose and starving yourself, because you don't have food. So when that started to happen, I would put my diet on a diet. So it got to a point where there was very little to eat. There was one diet I was on where I was only eating 2 different foods. That's not sustainable. It's not healthy. I shouldn't have been allowed. But it does happen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm amongst the majority of women who've gone through that.
I think you are the majority of people, perhaps, at least in the United States.
Yeah.
This is a great overview. I almost just want to take that 30 seconds to a minute, what you just said, and post it all over because I was really synthesized it all well. That's so much learning and education. you don't just realize what you just spoke about, the whole dieting cycle and everything overnight.
No.
When did you start to shift? Like, were you in college? Was it after college? Was it after you had kids? How many children do you have? I know you gotta go in like an hour to go figure out your kid.
I have 2 kids, but so I will date myself by saying that I've been a registered dietitian since '95, which is a long time ago. And I knew then that when I went to become a registered dietitian, it really wasn't because I was interested so much in the field of nutrition. It was more I wanted to prove the people in my family and my community that the nutrition information I was given was wrong because it didn't work. It didn't work. So something's wrong and I'm going to go learn what's right. So I got my degree in the clinical space. I went to an Ivy League school for the education piece. So I really got a lot of information. And while I was in graduate school on my own, I read the book Intuitive Eating when it first came out. By Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch, which is now this summer is going to be in its 4th edition. They have a workbook. It's an excellent program. But when I first read it, I was like, that's a good idea, but I don't think that's for me because if I eat intuitively, I'm going to be bigger. And that was a fear of mine, as is for many people living in a bigger body is fearful because there's such weight stigma in our society and fat phobia, and we don't treat people of different body sizes with kindness. And I didn't want to experience that. So I said, this sounds like a good idea, but I don't think I can do it. Fast forward, had my children. I knew I didn't want them to go through diet cycling. And I made it clear that I wasn't going to police their food. I made sure that my family members wouldn't say anything about their bodies. You could talk about how strong they are, how kind they are, their integrity, but we weren't going to talk about a thin body, a thick belly, none of it. It wasn't going to be discussed. The buck stopped with me. So as much as I wasn't necessarily practicing intuitive eating, I knew enough that the dieting rules of this is good, that's bad, eat this, don't eat that, those things were not going to be passed down to my children. And then I would say probably at the beginning of the 2010 decade, I found the health at every size philosophy. And that really synthesized the idea of intuitive eating for me and made me realize that, yes, all along this thought that dieting doesn't work and, maybe I should trust my body. And there were all these rules that I had accumulated over time from all the different diets. And I just didn't know what to trust anymore, that maybe I should start to trust myself. So that was the beginning of that journey.
I love it. You began to trust yourself. You write that one day, it just hit me as I was debating the quote unquote virtue of an apple. Was it good or bad? You write that you realized your only problem was with diets and these ridiculous do's and don'ts that you learned, that there was nothing wrong with your body. You were sick and tired of listening to these outside commercial industry folks, a $60 business. I think that's such a powerful quote on your website. Let's explore this just a little bit. So you've had kids, 15 years ago, you've been exposed to intuitive eating, but you're like, nah, that's not for me. But now with health at every size, you're there, you're thinking about an apple. What do you mean the virtue of an apple, like good or bad? What was kind of going through your mind as you made this transition to health at every size living?
Yeah. So when I thought back to all the diets I'd been on, if I was on a diet, I collected those diet rules, the do's and don'ts. And then when I went off that diet and went onto another diet, it was very hard to erase the rules that I'd followed. So I would then add the new rules onto it, right? And I think a lot of people do that, right? And so going back to when I started dieting, it was the 80s. I'm really dating myself. It was the 80s. So it was like the carb craze. We were all eating high carb. Fat was to be feared, right? And nobody really talked about protein. Okay, so we're moving on in the decades and we're, in the new millennium, and all of a sudden paleo shows up and protein's the hit now, right? And carbohydrates are still okay. They're not bad, but now they have to be a certain kind of carbohydrate, right? And there were certain fruits that were no's that you should not, and I have finger air quotes here, but that you shouldn't eat. So those rules got added. And then, I wasn't on this diet, and I'm just mentioning it as what happens to people, but say then you went on to keto next, then you were to remove fat, then what's left? Well, of course, intermittent fasting would be next because that means don't eat anything, right? So I was getting to the point where I was like, WTF, because I don't know if this is explicit or not, but it's a freaking apple. Just eat the apple. Like, we know that apple provides fiber, and it's soluble fiber, so it's good for your gut, and it's good for lowering cholesterol. We know the benefits of eating fruits and vegetables. Why remove them? Why remove them from the diet? And so really, I think what it came down to wasn't just the yeses and the nos, but was how much anxiety and guilt will this food cause me if I eat it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So much baggage around
Right.
an apple.
Right. So when I talk to my clients about intuitive eating and we discuss honoring your hunger and honoring your satisfaction, and they begin to learn it, the first thing I say to them is hunger should feel uncomfortable because it's a natural process in our body. It's a survival process to get us to eat so we don't die. And then fullness or satisfaction should feel comfortable because now we're fueled with the energy we need to go on with our day. But the opposite was true. When I would get hungry, there would be, some discomfort from the hunger, but also feeling like, oh, well, maybe I'm doing something right because I'm hungry. And that was a good thing, quote unquote, good thing, because maybe that would make me lose weight, which I didn't realize at the time was doing damage, to my metabolism by doing that. But then also on the other side, when I would eat, I felt anxious too, because, well, was that a good food or a bad food? Did I have too much? Did I not have enough? Or, all those kinds of things. And I wasn't paying attention to my own cues for fullness. It was like a permission bubble opened. I was entitled to certain amounts of food based on the diet rules, and I would eat it whether or not I was overfull or underfull, and that was all I got. And so that really wasn't listening to what my body needed.
Yeah. And big picture, why do you think you weren't listening to what your body needed? Meaning, at some level, your body wasn't enough. You had this body image of what your body should be, and it wasn't good enough. And, since your body wasn't good enough, you had to follow these diets. Where did you talk about the commercial diet industry worth 60 billion? How does the commercial diet industry get these messages out there that your body's that food, there's all these rules around food, that you got to manage it all, you got to look a certain way? Talk to me about this corporate industry. What is that?
So I think that the diet industry is a big business area that feeds on our fears and insecurities that we're not good enough as we are, and we need to change to be different. I think that it did come from my family of origin to start, but only because my family of origin had been influenced by the diet industry, starting back dieting goes back way far, but even just after post-World War II, to get women back into the house instead of out in the workforce once the men came home from war, the way that they were sort of inspired to go back home was that they were influenced now to have smaller bodies, and you can go home and you can wear this girdle and you can eat this food. And that's how, how it sort of turned up. And then if you think ahead to the 60s, the change of what models look like, Twiggy came on, right? So very small women. And as the decades have gone on, what you can see is that the body ideal, quote unquote body ideal, has changed a little bit as we go. We went from Twiggy to Kim Kardashian, and that's a little bit different. But in both scenarios, they are less than 10% of the female population. In the US, the majority of women are size 16 or above, and yet we don't see that represented in mainstream media. What we do hear, especially during the this January, if you watched any TV, every other commercial is for a diet company. You have Oprah screaming bread at you. You've got Noom saying it's not a diet. P.S. It's a diet. You've got Maria Osmond screaming about her Nutrisystem. They're all diets, right? They're all showing these unattainable ways to get smaller and then not be able to stay smaller. And then they blame you for not being able to do it, right? So I would say that industry that preys on the fears and insecurities is, what is causing a lot of damage to the self-esteem of women and girls. And now they're even preying on males, because some women are, have moved over to the health at every size intuitive eating, and they're quitting the diet cycle. So now they have to prey on men. So now you see these insanely thin men with these buff, arms, and men don't necessarily look like that, so it's getting difficult for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. So much outside noise just telling people what to do.
Yeah. And the more you listen to it, the more you tamp down your ability to hear your own cues for hunger and fullness and listen to your body.
Exactly. You said over time, you learned to listen to your body instead of diet culture, and found freedom from restriction and freedom from guilt and shame that was paired with every diet. I'm going to say that again, because that is so powerful. I learned to listen to my body instead of diet culture. I found freedom from restriction and freedom from guilt and shame that was paired with every diet. So learning to listen to your body, did you read books? Did you work with a therapist? You said you were exposed to the health at every size thing in 2010. Was that a book? Did you go to a conference? Like, what happened?
I think I found it on Facebook. I don't know exactly where I found it, but I remember finding it. And I had a friend in town who was a yoga instructor, and I said to her, and I didn't really understand, use the intuitive eating yet, but I remember saying to her, mindfulness is really important. Let's talk about this a little bit, because I know you work in mindfulness, and I'd like to work from a place of mindful eating. And it sort of started from there, where it was like really listening to yourself and tuning in. And then it became even bigger, where it was, okay, well, here are these 10 principles, and how can we get mad at diet culture and fire our internal food police and really begin to enjoy food. And there's a woman, her name is Reagan Chastain. She is a body activist. She has a blog called Dances with Fat. And she said, she has this analogy that I love, which is, if you're given a gift and you don't like it, you either re-gift it, or you shove it in the back of the closet, or you just try to tuck it away, right? It's not something you're going to pay attention to or take care of. But if somebody gives you a gift that you really like and treasure and enjoy, you're going to put it on a shelf, you're going to dust it, you're going to really take care of it. And that analogy sort of goes along with how we think about our bodies. If we don't like our bodies, we're less likely to care for them. Right. Yeah. So a lot of times people think when we go off of dieting that we are letting ourselves go. But what we're doing is once you let go of the dieting and you're able to make peace with your body and make peace with food, you're more likely to take care of your body because you respect it. Or, on the continuum of body loathing to body loving, you could be at acceptance, you could be at respecting, you can be someplace on there. But if you're away from the body loathing, which happens a lot with dieting, and get more towards acceptance or at least respecting your body, then you're going to take care of it. You're going to eat foods that confer health or make you feel good, and you're going to know what makes you feel good. You're going to move your body in a way that feels joyful to you. Like you said, you took a walk this afternoon or this morning where you are, right? And I jumped on a bike today. That made me feel great. So those are things that we can do because we enjoy doing them. But when you go back to how dieting is, if it says you need to do this kind of exercise, like everybody's doing CrossFit or everybody's doing powerlifting, whatever the newest thing is, and you can't do it because maybe your body's old like mine, or maybe you have an injury, or maybe you don't have an able body, you're going to feel guilty that you can't do that activity. But if you find something you like that's sustainable, you're more likely to do it over time. And actually your level of fitness is a real determinant of health, more than body weight ever was.
Yeah. And before we kind of start exploring some of these ways you've gone on to really share this message, you mentioned earlier one of the fears that prevented you back in 95 of intuitive eating was like, I'm going to get bigger. I'm not going to be able to stop. You didn't trust yourself around food. I feel like that's such these limiting beliefs that come up with dieting, the one you just mentioned earlier. If I go off dieting, I'm not taking care of myself, I'm not doing the right thing. This other limiting belief that you had as well, if I do this, if I unrestrict, and you found freedom from unrestriction, if I unrestrict, like something bad is going to happen. Can you share any wisdom or stories around this fear of unrestriction?
Yeah, I would say a lot of times with my clients, when I tell them we're not going to diet, they're like, well, I need a set of rules because
Yeah.
I need rules because I feel like I'm going to fall off a cliff without a support wire or something. And that's what it feels like when you haven't listened to your body your whole life. And then all of a sudden somebody says, well, if you listen to it, you'll be in a safer place. That's difficult to do. But I remind them that when you're a baby and you're hungry, you cry and somebody answers and feeds you. And if you think about toddlers, I don't know how many babies you've been around, but if you think about toddlers, when they're done eating, even if you try to put one more airplane spoonful in their mouth, they will spit it at you. They will throw food. They don't want anything to do with it. That's their intuition. They're taking care of their body, knowing when they've gotten to fullness, and they're honoring fullness, right? So you do have the tools. They've just been tamped down from all the years of dieting. So first, I think listening out for them is helpful. And then honoring them is the next step. I would say the biggest obstacle I had to letting all of that go was the fear of being fat. And I think that stems from a culture where there's so much weight stigma. You can't walk into a doctor's office without being weighed, although they don't need the weight for anything. BMI is BS. It doesn't measure anything. It's not meant to measure individuals. It was meant to be measuring societies, and it was developed by a philosopher, not a mathematician, not a doctor or a dietitian. And that doesn't even take into consideration body mass or age or gender or any of those things, right? So we're held to this number. And then based on that number, when you walk into a doctor's office, they tell you what? Lose weight and exercise. Now, did they ask me if I exercise already? No. Did they know whether or not I can lose weight? Did they screen me for an eating disorder? They didn't check my metabolic health before they told me, and I'm using me as just an example of weight stigma, before they tell me that there's something wrong with me and I need to do something about it. And that's what I feared was weight stigma. And I might have internalized it for myself where I feared being fat. But people who live in fat bodies, and I acknowledge this privilege that even after I've gone through this, I don't live in a fat body. People who live in fat bodies experience stigma all the time, and they experience fat phobia all the time. There's a lot of stereotypes around fat people being lazy. And I use the word fat. I just want to put this out there instead of the word obese. And I put that in air quotes because the word obese literally means eaten itself fat. And people who live in larger bodies are not necessarily there because they overate. Bodies come in all shapes and sizes. And what calling somebody obese does is it pathologizes a body size. It says at this size, you are not well. And that's not the case, right? So you can be well in a small body, well in a big body, unwell in a small body, unwell in a big body, vice versa, all that kind of stuff, right? But the weight stigma attacks the people who are in larger bodies, and the stress that people experience from weight stigma stops them from seeing doctors. So their access to healthcare is changed, and that piece can make them unhealthy. The stress from it can create inflammation, and that can make someone unhealthy. So you could have it internalized, but I feared, people looking at me on an airplane and not wanting to sit next to me. I feared going to a doctor's office and going in with a cold and being told to go on a diet, and that would treat it, right? So these are the things that my clients experience every day. And there was a fear of that. So, yeah.
I can relate to that. I could feel that. And you started becoming aware of this stigma, this hostility, and seeing it. And through this awareness, you said, hey, that's bullshit, basically.
Yeah. And it is.
I can trust my body. Maybe there's some fear around there, but I know that babies trust their bodies. They're more regulated. I can probably trust my body. And so learning to understrict, what was that first like for you? Was it like eating, this is probably an unrelated topic. What is actually, never mind. What did it first look like when you started learning to understrict? And then we'll dive into some of your other interests and services.
Yeah. I think it It came in phases. So at first, the unrestriction was to start to include foods that I had limited for years. I had restricted certain foods because they were either on the quote unquote bad list or because I felt terrible emotionally when I ate them rather than wondering how they felt physically. Right. So I started to slowly add those foods in, but I did find that when I was starting intuitive eating, I made the rookie mistake. And that rookie mistake was making it a hunger fullness diet. So I only ate when I was hungry and I stopped when I was full. And that limits the amount of time you can have where you can enjoy food. There's more than just eating for fuel. There's also eating for connection, right? So if it's someone's birthday or you're going out for drinks and there's things around, if you pick up something and put it in your mouth, that doesn't make you a non-intuitive eater. That makes you, feeding your soul, maybe not feeding your gut or feeding your, feeding your hunger. But that's part of living too. That competent eaters do that all the time. So that was the first piece, really getting to the point where I could understand that I didn't always have to stop when I was satisfied, or I didn't always have to wait until I was hungry. I found that I was like waiting to get hungry, and sometimes you just want to try something. You just want a little something, right? So that was the first part. And then I started to expand my food repertoire because it really had been very limited over the number of years that I dieted. And that was fun, but also a little scary. And I do that with clients too. I call it fearless eating. And we practice, eating foods and having them around so that we remove food scarcity, which is either literally a lack of food or limiting it so much that you don't have it. And that part was very helpful.
Interesting. I love it. And I can really hear your enthusiasm for this. It radiates out of you. You've gone on to do so many different things. I think probably the most obvious is just being a guest chef on Fox 61. Is that
a guest contributor? I wouldn't call myself a chef. I mean, I do make recipes on there, but I wouldn't call myself a chef.
What's that like, being on TV?
Oh, it's a lot of fun. It's like a whole 3 minutes, even though it took it's usually on a Monday. So Sunday I'm shopping and I'm cooking and I'm, trying out the recipe to make sure it tastes good and it looks right in the bowls and which bowl am I going to present in. And then it's 3 minutes, or, there's a cut in, there's always like breaking news. There was an accident here, or, this person's driving through town and whatever. So, it's just, it's fun. I really enjoy that piece. And I also find a way to weave in these messages.
Interesting.
When I am doing those segments. So I'm either working with a brand and sort of weaving in their information, or I'm not working with a brand and I'm weaving in my own non-diet philosophy into it. So like the last one I did was about a low FODMAP fried rice, and the low FODMAP diet is for people with irritable bowel syndrome. So I was teaching how to make this recipe for people with irritable bowel syndrome, but also weaving in the conversation about how it's good to eat carbohydrates and what they do for your body.
I was just going to ask about, you use the word FODMAP. That's for irritable bowel syndrome. What's a FODMAP food?
So
what was the meal that you cooked? I'm curious too.
Yeah, so it was fried rice. It was chicken fried rice, and it was good. But the low FODMAP diet, FODMAP is an acronym, and it stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols, which is a fancy way of saying fermentable carbohydrates. So basically, when these carbohydrates go into your gut, your microbes that live in your gut feed off of them and then produce gas, which is fermenting, or draw water into your gut, which can cause bloating. And people with irritable bowel syndrome really feel, when there's a little bit of stimulus in the gut, feel a real big reaction. While you might not have irritable bowel syndrome, and I have it, which I actually do, we may eat the same meal and you might not feel anything. And I am bloated and gassy and uncomfortable and all those kinds of things. And yet the same thing is happening in our guts, but you don't feel it and I do. So that's sort of how that works. So the low FODMAP diet is a 3-phase dietary intervention. It's not restrictive. It's not for weight loss. What it does is it removes the fermentable carbohydrates. You still have food from every food group. Just certain foods are pulled out. It's not intuitive, so you really do need that list. and it's for a short period of time. And after that short period of time, it's about 2 to 6 weeks, then we start to systematically reintroduce those highly fermentable carbohydrates to see which ones, if any, are a trigger for your symptoms.
Interesting. Yeah. And you had a bunch of resources on your website. I believe there was something about FODMAPs. You do nutrition counseling about this, right? There's some services. And was that a list on your website at goodnessgraciousLiving.com?
Yeah, so I have a couple of things on there. I have 2 freebies associated with irritable bowel syndrome. One is something called a Tell Your IBS Story template, and it's a 5-page PDF to fill out on your own before going to see your healthcare providers with your story of all the things you experience, your symptoms, what you think might be a trigger, when this started, what medications you might be on, what testing you might have done, so that when you walk into the office, you can hit the ground running, get diagnosed quickly, get treatment quickly. And that's free on my website, and I'm sure you'll put the link in the show notes for that, right? And then the second one is, if you've already been prescribed the Low FODMAP diet, I have a free webinar on the 3 strategies for success with the Low FODMAP diet, because it's difficult to follow. It's actually been proven to be 91% effective with the help of a dietitian, with the help of a GI dietitian in studies. So I would really recommend somebody working with a professional, not doing it on their own, but if they're having some trouble, this free webinar can work. And then if somebody wants to take a deeper dive and see the work I do with my clients and using the Low FODMAP diet, I do have a course on my website called How to Get Your Gut in Sync. And that course incorporates all the information that I share with my clients, including the Low FODMAP diet, alternative therapies, way to minimize stress and worry, because those things can impact your gut too.
And you got a online inner girl power.
Yes, I have I do. I have 2 things with that. So one is called the Inner Girl Power Challenge, and that's a freebie. And that's like a jump start to trying to eat intuitively and get off the diet cycle and trying out some of these things. I think there are 9 challenges in that ebook. So they're all fun, all free. And then if you want to take a deeper dive into that, I do have a course called the Inner Girl Power Non-Diet Mission. And that is really the work, again, that I do with my clients one-on-one, that I took and turned into a course for people who I can't get to or see, to do that work on their own. And everything's in there, from getting off the diet cycle to making peace with food and making peace with the inner critic and all of that. So those are all on my website, which you did mention was goodnessgraciousliving.com.
Are you on social media too, or maybe just people go to your website? Or where are you on social media?
Yeah, so I'd say I spend more time on Instagram than anywhere else, and that's at Goodness Gracious Living. But I'm on Twitter at GG Living, and I'm on Facebook with /Goodness Gracious Living.
Beth, thank you so much for coming on. I've so enjoyed your articulation and was just presenting this information, storytelling. Like, as a kind of storyteller myself, I really, really appreciate just how you're able to weave things together in a very obvious and tangible. And like, I felt myself several times going with this podcast, like when you said about that gift in the back, like,
yeah,
our bodies are like the gift that we don't want. We put it in the back of the closet when we go off dieting. That like clicked for me. So thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. I hope you put that gift on a shelf.
Yeah.